Hi guys, hope you're doing well. I've been getting a few questions from people. For those of you who don't know, I got my official ADHD diagnosis on Monday, so 2 days ago. And I've been getting a few questions on social media from people who are wondering, how do you feel now? And some, wonderful people, frankly, who are checking in with me, making sure that I'm okay, that there's that sort of undercurrent of sympathy, or there's a general feeling that, oh, you've been diagnosed with something like ADHD, and I guess it's a bad thing, and so they want to make sure that you're okay. Now, as someone who has received bad news in the past, and someone who's certainly been through mental health trauma, I've been suicidal twice, I've actually viewed my own ADHD diagnosis quite differently. For me, it's actually quite uplifting and positive, and I'll tell you why. By the way, I'm not speaking for anyone else here, and how you feel about your own assessment and diagnostic journey is your business, and it's valid. However you're feeling, that's valid. What you do with it about it is another matter entirely. But the reason it's been pretty uplifting and validating for me is that it gives me a reason. It helps explain some of the things that I've been struggling with. So, for example, procrastination, focus, and then having those episodes of almost manic focus. I mean, I'll give you an example since I'm actually in my office. So back in during the early parts of COVID, 2020, if you want to remember back then, through my work in the pageantry industry, everyone was going through a really crap time, right? So I decided I want to do something positive for the pageantry industry. And I thought what I would do, because I have a big network, I would reach out to those beauty pageant contestants and ask them and feature them in a book, because I published books before, one of the skills that I picked up through Amazon. And I picked up the skills publishing through Amazon. I didn't pick up the publishing skill through Amazon, but I basically created a form. I said, email me. Yeah, I created a bunch of questions, like 10 questions, and said, write a paragraph on each, send me a photo, and I'll put it in a book. And I had so many responses. I wasn't expecting this. We had 160 responses in probably 24 to 48 hours. And by the time I collated everyone's material, it was 1,600 pages long. And the longest book you can publish on Amazon is 800 pages. So I ended up having to publish 2 books. And to give you an idea, this is the thickness of what I created. And you can see it's pretty dense. It's pretty dense text. It's not like I've done, a large font book or something like that. Just trying to get a... So there you go. So the text, something like that. Sorry for the unprofessional camera work. But to give you an idea, this was turned around in 2 weeks. And that hyper focus, I mean, I would wake up in the morning, work on the book, go through submissions, do editing, edit the cover, whatever it was. And then I realized, hey, crap, why am I hungry? Oh yeah, it's 10 p.m. I haven't eaten breakfast. I haven't showered. I haven't brushed my teeth. And so it also helped explain. So getting the diagnosis didn't just explain, oh, this is why you procrastinate, this is why you have trouble focusing. It also explained how come sometimes I would go through periods where I really could focus, and I could focus better than anyone else. And I will also say that the community surrounding ADHD, from my point of view, has actually been incredibly uplifting and positive. And because I started my pageantry business through interviewing and done over 300 interviews. So I know quite a few people. And having now interviewed a few people for my ADHD channel, the one you're watching right now, ADHD School, I found a lot of people I found that people actually have the same sort of crazy brain that I do, or broken brain, as Angel said. We all have our own terminology. But it was amazing to me to find, wow, actually, I'm not the only one whose brain works like this, because for the longest time, I just felt, I mean, it sounds cliche, I felt weird. I felt like the odd one out. But I've said this before, I don't like really thinking like that, because it almost seems egotistical to think, oh, I'm alone in the world and no one thinks like me. I'm some sort of tortured genius. The world will never appreciate it. I just think that's a load of crap. So it was really validating and exciting to find a community of people who were crazy, but in the same way that I was. And that's not to say that, ADHD I mean, I would prefer to say ADHD is a superpower rather than a disability, don't get me wrong. But I remember watching one of Dr. Russell Barkley's video. He's an ADHD expert. I've got a couple of his books down there to read. He said that one of the myths about ADHD is in fact that it gives you the superpower, gives you superpowers. And he pointed out to research that shows pretty much that anyone who was successful with ADHD, the ADHD overall would have been a net negative, as in they would have actually performed even better if they hadn't had the ADHD. The one piece of research that's slightly different to that shows that where ADHD people do tend to have an advantage is in divergent thinking, which is basically, here's a brick, come up with 100 uses. Well, come up with as many uses for this brick, or, come up with as many uses as you can for this coffee cup in the next 5 minutes. That's where ADHD people tend to perform a bit better, which is not really surprising, but they're not as good in convergent thinking, which is, what's the answer to this maths problem, where there's basically only one answer, one correct answer. And overall, people with ADHD as a general populace have very similar IQ and IQ distribution to the neurotypical populace. So I do think, however, that when you do listen to someone with ADHD speaking, like myself, you can maybe think that we're more intelligent, or we might like to think we're more intelligent because especially the way we tell stories and the way our brains work, it happens so quickly that you may think of that as intelligence. And maybe in some ways it is. I said in, I think yesterday's video, there's a difference between scientific study and lived experience. And I do think scientific study by necessity has to lag a little bit behind lived experience, because scientific study won't study something until enough people report on it, which is a lived experience. And so I'd like to think I'm intelligent, and I think in my case, through IQ tests and so on, I am intelligent, at least based on that, but I think it's separate to ADHD. So I think it's a myth to say that people with ADHD, that it's a superpower, that it gives you gifts that other people don't have. But on the other hand, I do think it does give you, it does give you gifts, but I wouldn't say that it makes you a superhero, because that kind of implies that you're better than a normal person, right? Superhuman is better than normal human. So I should rephrase. I do think it gives you gifts, the ability for your brain to work 1 billion miles an hour. Don't get me wrong, that is a gift, and to switch focus. But it comes with its own burden of, okay, for every pro, there is also a con. Like, for example, your brain does work quickly, but the con, you can never shut your brain off. And so by most measures, at least in business, people perform better when they don't have the ADHD. But the margins are quite small, I think. And I honestly don't think people can take statistics too seriously. Everyone's an individual case. Everyone's symptomology of ADHD and presentation is different as well. So here I am saying, you know what? It explains a lot of the things that I've struggled with. And so I actually feel good about it. I really don't need anyone's sympathy. Don't get me wrong. I understand where it's coming from, and that's a beautiful thing. But I was actually just relieved when I got it, because I finally have an explanation for, this is why you think like that. This is why you think differently to other people. And this is why sometimes you can't understand why people don't think the way you think. Other people who have perhaps more severe, particularly impulsive or hyperactive ADHD, when they get the diagnosis, or if your child goes to get a diagnosis, they might actually be really upset about it, because they feel like, I'm broken, my brain's broken, or I'm stupid, or something. And especially if it's accompanied with difficulty reading, for example, they'll go, that means I'm stupid. This diagnosis means I'm stupid. And that can be very dangerous, because then you tend to live into that diagnosis, live into that truth, live into that reality. Once you label yourself as, I'm broken, or I'm stupid, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So to each their own. And when you get the news of a diagnosis, it really, whatever you feel is valid, but then the onus really goes on you to, okay, you've got the diagnosis. If you accept it, and if you don't, you go somewhere else and get a second opinion. If you accept the diagnosis, now what? And as someone who's done a lot of life coaching, I can tell you all my sessions inevitably come down, no matter how horrific the story is, or how horrific the problem the person is dealing with, at the end of it, it's like, okay, got that. Now what? What do you want to do about it? And that's a question that each one of us, each one of you watching is going to have to answer. So even if you haven't had your diagnosis yet, or you haven't even decided that you want to have your diagnosis, I think it's always good to sort of decide, okay, what's the actual outcome I want here? And for me, after having spoken to a few ADHD people and been prompted, maybe I should go get an assessment. For me, what I was really looking for was an explanation as to why I struggled with some things that other people seem to find really easy. That's really what I was after. And the diagnosis has given me that pathway. So I'm relieved more than anything else. I will, in all likelihood, I've got an appointment with a psychiatrist for medication in about 3 weeks, and I'm actually quite eager to try that just to see how it affects the way my brain works, and is it better in some ways, worse in others, and I'll let you know how that goes. But for me, I don't view a diagnosis of ADHD in the same way. For example, I lost both my grandparents to terminal cancer. I definitely do not view a diagnosis of ADHD in the same way that I would view a diagnosis of cancer, terminal or not, or diabetes. And as I said, I don't think it is a superpower as such, but I do think it definitely gives you certain abilities that other people don't have. And then it comes with burdens, let's say or cons that other people don't have to deal with as well. And so I choose to look at it as, hey, I don't think I'm better or worse, but I'm certainly a bit different to most people. And I do think that's a cool thing. And maybe inherently that's why I've always sort of normal as being overrated or normal as being boring. I shouldn't say that, because I don't think it's a good thing to label normal people or typical people as boring. But sometimes it helps just to view yourself that way, because there's a lot of other people out there who will say if you have ADHD that, you are, well, the stigma, right? You get what I mean. So it can sometimes be helpful to go, yeah, I do think ADHD is kind of cool. And it is. So that's how I feel post-diagnosis, 2 days post-diagnosis. And so for me, I actually don't want the sympathy. I don't need the sympathy. I don't feel sorry for myself at all. I'm kind of excited to go back, especially to my ADHD friends, and say, yeah, I'm now one of you, as I just did. I just sent a message to Eliza, because I sent her just a message where I just said, it's official. I deliberately left it a bit cryptic, as you messaged back saying, what does that mean? What's official? And so that was cool. But if you have any questions about your own diagnosis or assessment journey, and whether I recommend a certain pathway, or I guess if you're on Australia, I can't really recommend it. I've only gone to one place, so I can't even recommend like a good place to go. But if you have any questions, just put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to come back to you with an answer. But I'll see you tomorrow.